Now and again, whilst watching a major sporting event or perhaps glimpsing the evening news, you might have seen photographers running around with more than one camera on at once, often two, sometimes three or even more. And you might have thought to yourself, what on earth are they doing? Are they just showing off? Yes, those of us that use more than one camera at once are basically just showing off. That's all there is to it. Well, no, of course not. There's a very good reason why you would use more than one camera at once. And that is that it allows you to switch between two different ways of shooting very rapidly. Certainly far more quickly than swapping lenses over, changing settings on a camera. And if you've got the ability to do it, it's a very, very useful thing to do. So stick with me and I'll talk through a few of the reasons why you might want to do it, what the advantages are, and give you a few tips if you find yourself heading down this route. So as I say, the main reason you would have two camera bodies on the go at once is to allow you to transition rapidly between two different ways of shooting. Now there's kind of an underlying thing here, which is owning two camera bodies in the first place. And that may seem quite extravagant, but as a professional, that's kind of basic. It's kind of expected that you've got some sort of backup. You don't have to have exactly the same camera twice, let's say. You can have a really high-end body and then have another body that's from the same system that kind of backs it up. That's fine, but it's kind of taken for granted that as a professional you've got a backup camera in place. That's just kind of a given. So the concept of having two cameras is kind of there already if you're a working professional. Now, having two cameras on the go at once really only suits situations where you are going to be faced with lots of different shooting situations and rapidly changing situations. So if you're in a studio, for example, it's highly unlikely you're going to want two cameras on the go. You're probably completely in control of the lighting, probably fairly in control of your subjects. You're not going to need to have a second way of shooting things instantly available to hand. But if you're shooting live events in any way, even if you've got some degree of control over them, it can be very, very handy to be able to switch between two styles very, very quickly. And I need to stress that that speed is important. If you stop and think how long it takes to take a lens off your camera, put a different lens on your camera, put the other lens away safely, and then carry on shooting, you probably will have missed that moment that you saw. Likewise, think how long it can take to change settings. And again, you might have missed the moment. Also, you may forget to change them back. Taking a flash off, putting a flash on, triggers, all those extra accessories that you might need to deal with different situations, transitioning between them on just one camera body can take not only a decent amount of time, but can easily lead to you forgetting what you're set for and then shooting in the wrong settings. Way back in the film days, it was not uncommon to have two camera bodies on the go because one might be loaded with one type of speed film and the other with a different speed. Or even more commonly, one camera body was loaded with colour and the other was loaded with black and white. It was even possible back in the day when, of course, film obviously had a limit to how many shots you get in each roll. Memory cards these days, of course, yes, they have a limit, but they're often up in the thousands of shots. Back when you had a limited number of shots in each roll, it wasn't uncommon to have two bodies so you could keep shooting. I can think back to times when I assisted photographers and they would just keep shooting. I would be reloading the other body, hand them that body, take the full body off them, and so on, and so on, and so on, allowing them never to sort of break concentration, never to interrupt their connection with the subject. And yes, in that way, they had two bodies on the go. And arguably they weren't doing what I've just described in terms of two different shooting approaches. It was simply a way of having almost infinite ammo, if you like. That, of course, doesn't really apply these days because, like I say, memory cards, they're not infinite, but since you can fit thousands of shots on your views, you've got a pretty good idea if you're about to run out. So probably one of the prime reasons you would have two cameras on the go is to have one mounted with, say, a standard zoom lens, a 24-70, and another armed with a longer telephoto, in this case a 70-200. What that allows you is a very wide range of focal lengths. So in the blink of an eye, you can switch from shooting something quite close up that's near to you, where you've got to get as much in the frame as possible, perhaps, all the way down to something further away where you're reaching out and isolating a detail. Now, inevitably, it is much quicker to simply pull a different camera up to your eye than it is to take a lens off, replace a lens, etc., etc. Now, on the occasions that I use two bodies, this is probably why I'm doing it at least half the time. It's a very, very good reason to have two bodies on the go, to give you that huge range of focal lengths and allow you to capture as much of the action as possible. Another reason to have two camera bodies on the go is to give you two different styles of shooting. On lots of occasions, I have had one camera rigged with a fast prime lens, in this case a 50mm 1.4, set for a high ISO, allowing me to shoot reportage sort of as unobtrusively as possible. And my other camera body is set with a flash trigger, and I will have rigged flashes at various spots around the venue I'm working in. So this camera is synchronized to those flashes, and it's usually set for a much lower ISO and a faster shutter speed. And that, of course, gives you a certain look. That gives me, the flash look, which I've set up and I've lit accordingly. And my other camera gives me a more natural reportage look, allowing me, of course, to get two different looks from the same shoot. You can do a sort of a more cut down version of this, if you like, by having one with, say, a standard zoom on, a 24-70 and a flash gun, allowing you for sort of closer in, nice group shots. And then your other camera has perhaps a longer lens with a fast maximum aperture, very fast ISO, allowing you to capture more candid, natural shots at a distance with people unaware you're even shooting. I've even on occasions had one camera body set up to shoot stills and the other camera set up to shoot video. Now, I wouldn't recommend this, actually. It's a bit like the proverbial rubbing your head and patting your tummy. It's not easy to do two things at once, and trying to keep your mind simultaneously in a stills mindset and a video mindset isn't very straightforward. If you have a client that requests both from the day, have a good long conversation with them first and try and explain that it's far better shot as two separate things, certainly not at the same time. So this is a bit of a before you've even started shooting tip, but give some thought to the second body you're going to buy. Now, in some respects, it makes a lot of sense, of course, to buy the same camera twice. That way you can be sure that as many of the settings as possible can be absolutely identical. Budget may prevent this, but there is something to be said for having bodies with different capabilities. You might have one that's better at high ISOs or has got a faster frame rate, and that might suit shooting in two different styles. I would state, though, that it's a really good idea to make sure you buy two cameras from the same system, so that things like lenses and accessories are as cross-compatible as possible. And as an extension of that, I'd highly recommend getting ones that take the same batteries and, if possible, the same memory cards to minimise the amount you have to carry and to allow you to sort of hot swap as much as you can. So having got your two cameras on the go, it's really important that you set them up as identically as possible when it comes to things like what I would call sort of the functional settings, not the moment-by-moment exposure settings, let's say, but the actual functionality of the camera. So if, like me, you tend to use back button focus, make sure they're both set for back button focus. Make sure the focusing modes are similar. Make sure that you've got sort of custom buttons set up the same way so that when you switch from one to the other, you're not fumbling, you're not rummaging, you're not missing a shot because you've gone, oh God, I can't remember how this one works. Which one am I on? Now, of course, if you're using them to shoot in two different styles, it's perfectly feasible that one might be set for a certain shutter speed and a certain ISO because you've synced it with the flash, let's say, and the other might be set for a much higher ISO, different white balance. Fine, it's okay that they're on different settings at that level, but it really, really will help if on an actual sort of operating level, they work the same way. On a practical level, buy yourself decent straps, and buy yourself straps that are designed to work as a pair like these Black Rapids I've got. Carrying two cameras and two lenses, particularly if they're constant aperture zooms, gets very heavy very quickly. And trust me, you don't want cheap, nasty straps. Not to mention the fact that with all this gear hanging off you, and if you're covering some event, you're probably running around quite a bit, you want them to be nice and secure and nice and solid. I spend a little bit of time also getting them set up right. You want the whole system to be very smooth and easily accessible. You don't want to be fumbling for stuff and clips here, there, and everywhere. You want it to be as smooth and as rapid a transition as possible from camera body to camera body. And as an extension of that, if you tend to shoot the same sort of things in the same sort of way, if, let's say, you continually shoot events with a standard zoom and a telephoto zoom, have them on the same side each time. You want it to be almost automatic. You instinctively think, boom, long zoom, boom, boom, there we go. And not have to go, which side's which, because even half a second's delay, and you could have missed that perfect shot you were looking for. Now, of course, none of this is cheap. We're talking about buying an extra camera, quite possibly an extra lens as well. But if you find yourself regularly working at events or covering things that are live and you've got no control over them, and you want to have a greater range of focal lengths, or you want to be able to shoot in two different styles and be able to switch between them very, very rapidly, then really two camera bodies is by far the best way to go.